Welcome to Datafounders, a series of interviews where we talk with founders and investors who build or who invest in data stack and startups that help to solve real problems using data science. My name is Peter Zhegin, and today I'm talking to Kyle Kirwan, who is a co-founder and the CEO of Bigeye. Hi, Kyle. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Hey, Peter. Thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be here as well.
Awesome. To start, maybe you can tell us a bit more about yourself and about Bigeye. What does it do? And maybe just introduce us to this wonderful company.
For sure. So let's see. I'm Kyle, one of the two co-founders at Bigeye. My co-founder Igor is a close friend of mine. He and I met while working together on the data platform team at Uber. So I started there in 2013. The company was pretty small at the time. I just moved from Florida, which is where I'm originally from. A friend of mine, actually, as a founder's story, a friend of mine was living in San Francisco at the corner of 16th and Mission, if anybody knows where that is. And he was living in a studio, and he said, "Hey, you just graduated college. Why don't you come out here and you can sleep on my couch underneath my bunk bed in my studio until you find a job. Or if you run out of money, then maybe you can just go back to Florida and do whatever you're going to do." So I took him up on that. I sold my gaming computer to a friend in exchange for the one-way flight. And I was on that couch for about 2 months while I was applying for work, and started at Uber as one of their first data analysts in 2013. The data team at the time, it was really just 3 data engineers, and then they were looking for their first person to work on analytics. So I joined and got to do a lot of the early work on LTV analysis, on performance ad campaigns, on some predictive stuff around like driver or rider ratings. There were a lot of interesting and very unsolved problems that I had, I'm sure, very crude solutions for in retrospect, but it was a ton of fun. And then was there for about 6 years, a little less. And during that time, I got to work on their A/B testing platform team, which I helped start. And then I was also a product manager there for their metadata tools. So I launched the data catalog product there called Databook, as well as their lineage product, data quality tools, data freshness tools, things around cost tracking, GDPR stuff, kind of anything in the metadata space was that team's scope, and that team is called Data Knowledge Platform. So that was kind of the lead up to starting Bigeye, which obviously is in a related space.
Mm-hmm. And what does Bigeye do? I know this is a data quality engineering platform, right? But maybe you can parse it a bit and explain what it does, and then we can connect 2 dots. How did you actually arrive to Bigeye?
Yeah, great question. So when we call it a data quality engineering platform, that refers to a pretty large, ambitious scope for the company. But specifically what we do today, it seems like it's starting to be called data observability, sometimes data monitoring. There's a couple different terms floating around. Data quality is still just used as a big blanket term. I think data observability is a pretty good name for what we do. So what Bigeye does is it connects to a data warehouse, a data lake, a data lakehouse. It could even connect to application databases, basically anything that speaks SQL. And what we do is we collect metrics or statistics from that data source continuously. And then we can enable anomaly detection or manual rules if customers want to. But our primary use case is anomaly detection on those statistics. And there are a lot of analogies between what we do and what and APM tools do for software teams. So think like Datadog or AppDynamics or New Relic, companies like that. Very, very similar paradigm. So as opposed to maybe some of the data quality solutions that have been tried in previous generations, which are very focused around sort of cleaning the data or modifying it while it's in flight, we're very focused on at scale. How do we identify changes, problems, shifts in the data, pipelines that aren't refreshing, things like that? How do we flag those to data engineering teams so that they can go and resolve the root causes of those problems? And then all of the measurement framework, SLAs and things like that around data is what we work on today.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure while working at Uber, data pipelines were probably one of the problems, one of the challenges that you have seen. And I'm sure there were a lot of other opportunities to improve. I don't know how to run A/B tests better, or how to do something else better. Why did you pick exactly this challenge? Why actually Bigeye was born?
Yeah, so this actually, and this very relevant, I'm sure, to the sort of founder audience here. The story behind the company is that I got to work on all of these tools at Uber, which was just super exciting. And I loved that I was, even before there was a data platform team, I was trying to build tools for my teammates on the analytics team. So I was building kind of these early frameworks for running queries on an ad hoc box and then pushing that data and cleaning it up with like an R script and then pushing that into some sort of a dashboarding system. And I was showing that framework. It was very, very crude stuff, but I was showing that to my teammates who were sometimes still working in like Excel, or they were working in Google Sheets or these other things. It was like, hey, look, like we can build these self-refreshing dashboards, and we can sort of pipeline this stuff. And I had more fun doing that a lot of the time than doing the actual analysis. And so when I got to work on the data platform team, it was awesome. I got to every day go meet with data science managers, data scientists, with analysts in marketing or operations or finance, and I got to sit with them and learn about what was still difficult, where they got lost, where they got confused, where there were sort of communication problems. As the team gets bigger and bigger and the amount of data grows, the problem of what data set do I use, or where does that come from, or who owns it, or is it in a good state for use right now, or is this how I should be using it? Those problems got larger and larger, and they became a drag on the organization's ability to use data. And so it was just a ton of fun to be able to solve those challenges for other folks that, that is what I was doing when I joined the company. So it was great to solve problems for people who were like me. And I just found that so engaging. When I decided to work on this project was after I briefly worked on the airports team at Uber. And so I worked on a feature where it helps you select which gate at the airport you're going to. I worked on some features around reporting systems back to airports about, like, when does Uber owe a fee to the airport for a trip that was completed, stuff like that. Interesting stuff, but it just wasn't, and it was super impactful for the company financially, but it wasn't as fun as working on data tools. And so that was kind of my light bulb moment where I was like, no, this was the most engaging work that I ever did. I want to do more of that. How do I do more of that? How do I keep solving these problems? And how do I solve them in the general sense, not just for Uber's stack? And so that was sort of why. And then the how was basically just going out and saying, here are folks who left Uber who are now working at other companies. Can I interview you? Finding out who their friends were, so people that I don't directly know, interviewing them, and going around and basically just starting with, tell me what are the top 5 things that suck for you in data. That was the question. It was like, tell me 5 things that suck. And they would just open up, I'd buy them coffee and they would tell me Redshift is slow, or BigQuery is slow, or like the queue is totally backed up, or like these people write these garbage queries and it totally crushes everything, or like these people are doing visualization completely wrong and it drives me nuts, or like the metrics are like, this team calls this metric this and this other team calls this metric that, and they're completely different. But what I was actually looking for was data discovery problems. That was my sort of bias that I was trying to suppress, because I loved working on the data catalog. And it just wasn't coming up as much as I thought. The questions about, like, how do I find data, or how do I know like who I can talk to about it, or like how do I should I use the TS column, should I use the event loaded at column, should I use the some other column, like which is the right one to use as the notion of time in my analysis. I was looking for those types of questions, but what kept coming up over and over and over again was quality problems. So people would say, my dashboard breaks. I'm not looking at it every day. I built it and then I sent it out to the marketing team, to the ops team, to the C-suite, and the person who produced that dashboard, it's a piece of work that they created, but they're not sitting there and looking at it all the time. Like, this is what self-service analytics is about, or even when it's not truly self-service, but it's an analyst or scientist producing an output, and then that output is used repeatedly by the organization. They're not going in and eyeballing it every single day because they have other things to do. And so people kept telling me over and over again that, like, my dashboard breaks and my user tells me about it. And then I feel bad. I look bad. The user has a bad day. I have a bad day. Or my pipeline stops refreshing and I find out about it because somebody yells at me. Like these types of things kept coming up over and over and over again. And so I said, well, okay, I did work on this stuff on the data team at Uber. And I remember what worked well about our solutions there, where I would have changed something or done it differently, having seen what did or did not scale. And so because that quality problem kept coming up, not usually as number one, very often warehouse performance was the top complaint. But I'm in a much better position as a founder to work on problems around metadata or around data management. So that was why we decided to kind of focus on that problem specifically within the larger sort of data space.
You mentioned a very important, in my opinion, moment when you had this bias, right? And you could follow it instead of listening other people. You could just do it, do catalogs because you really enjoyed it. I'm curious, what was the moment, or maybe what were your approach towards kind of understanding that what you hear from people is generalizable and you need to put your maybe passion or maybe your bias back and just do what people say? Is there any specific way to understand that you heard a lot and you can generalize on that and build a company for that? Or it's very individual and there is no kind of way to measure it maybe?
Well, I mean, for me, it came down again just talking to people, and I think that the advantage in interviewing people and talking to people is you get very high bandwidth qualitative information, right? So sometimes somebody's going to say something, and if you read it or if you got a summary of it, like if you sent out a survey and you wrote a question a particular way, and you get 100 data points back from that survey, you're going to see, okay, 100 people responded to this question. That doesn't give you really, really high fidelity feedback about what they were thinking, though. They're just choosing something from a list. When you interview someone directly, you get really high fidelity information about what are they struggling with, what do they find painful. You sometimes get that from body language or exactly how they answer a question, or you can double click on something. Or if sometimes I say things and somebody else hears something else. There's a huge problem in data, right?
Yeah.
There's like, I say this word, you hear this other word, and we're talking past each other and we mean different things because there's so much jargon to begin with, and then it's kind of constantly evolving. Sometimes legitimately, sometimes through marketing, some mix of the two. But the point is, like, when I'm talking to you and I say certain words, you may hear other things. And when you're in an interview with someone, it gives you an opportunity to clarify that or push further and really understand what exactly they're struggling with. And so the interview process is really useful for that. The risk that you run is the bias in who you decide to interview. And so in going back to my A/B testing roots, in that world, we would always push for what is the most generalized population that you can sample from. Ideally, you want to sample from that if you can, because that's going to remove as much bias from your results as possible. And so I think with the interview process, you're trading bias for fidelity. And so in my case, I was trying to interview, if I could, I started with first degree connections, my immediate former colleagues or friends, but I always pushed for, can I interview someone that I don't know, that they know? And then from there, if you're lucky, you can get a third or something like that. And as you keep going further and further away, you may still be in some local area, it may be tech, or it may be the Bay Area, or it might be New York, or it might be design, or whatever it is that your particular network is most focused on. But the further you get away from your initial connections, the better your generalizability is going to get. And then I think it's just a matter of constantly documenting the themes. What are people talking about? If you have a starting set of themes that you can key into when people mention those things, it makes it a little easier to categorize. But I think you have to decide for yourself, where's the balance between fidelity and bias. You can start out with very high fidelity, and then you can use survey methods to go and send out a much larger and less biased survey once you've used the high fidelity information to understand what are the consistent themes that you're hearing.
I guess it's very important to expand this coverage and to have a quite high level, or low level and a high level as well, vision on the ecosystem. And if we talk about the kind of tech ecosystem, tech stack, maybe the better word, probably the tech stack, you mentioned a couple of things: data lakes, data warehouses. These are relatively new things, at least for a lot of people. Do you think they somehow affected positively or negatively Bigeye? Were these things kind of a wave that you can ride, or maybe it's something that maybe stops you or prevents you from moving faster? So what's the connection between Bigeye, your idea, and a wider tech stack?
Interesting. I think for me, the thing that's exciting for me and the thing that gets me, I mean, like it's starting a company is a lot of work, right? The thing that gives me the energy to keep going is that I'm excited about the large change that's going on right now in the industry that I care about the most and I'm focused on, which is sort of the larger, call it the data industry. I don't want to call it data engineering because it's bigger than that, right? It's data science, it's analysis, warehousing, infrastructure, whatever. But I think the thing that's exciting to me is that I see this sea change going on, and I like to tell people I think we're in the middle of a renaissance right now in data. I mean, not that it hasn't been evolving constantly since pen on paper, we've been writing down numbers and trying to analyze them. The cholera outbreak with Jon Snow, like early famous example of a very, very basic analytics. But I think that the thing that's exciting is that there's a cultural shift going on right now towards, hey, like data is important. It's not secondary to software or infrastructure anymore. Like, because a lot of problems around infrastructure have been solved to some degree, a lot of the opportunities for weaving data directly into our businesses, into society, into how organizations work, those doors are wider open today than they ever have been. And so what that means is there's more focus on data than there ever has been in the past. And there's also more pressure on it as well, which means the tools have to get better, the processes have to get better, the practitioners have to become more skilled. And the practitioners are not just people stuffed in a closet anymore, working on the data and then like throwing it over the fence to the rest of the company. Like the practitioners are interfacing directly with different functions and roles within the business. They're speaking directly to the C-suite, or they're talking to somebody who runs marketing. And so you see both the level of data awareness and literacy in those stakeholders is going up, because they're interfacing with data more often and more directly. And these sort of external soft skills of people that work in data is also going up, because again, they're on the other side of that interface. And then just the changes going on in tooling. So I start to see, for example, like data engineers are becoming more and more focused on infrastructure operations. There's more of a division of labor for the logic of pipelines or the actual analysis that's going on to analysts, to data scientists, and we're starting to see a change in the division of that labor. And I think that the folks at DBT, their posts about analytics engineering as a phrase is, I think, like the easiest thing to point to about that type of a change. But I just think that these huge evolutions that we're going through right now in data largely are super exciting. And I think that whenever you're starting a company, you can be really keyed in on like, okay, is this particular type of database, like an important thing that's coming up right now? Or is this is data observability, like, is that really important to people right now? Or like, is that going to get talked about a lot? Is that going to get its own budget? You do need to think about those things tactically, I think. But what's going to actually get you out of bed every day? If for me, like, it needs to be bigger than that. And it needs to be sort of like a large change that is bigger than just my company. It's something that's going on at the industry level that I want to be part of the vector sum, if you will, of like all of our boats are pointing in different directions, but they're all kind of generally moving forward. And I want my boat to be pushing that forward for the industry. So,
and if we look at these major trends like specialism between data engineers and data scientists, so new kind of roles emerge. They're clarified, right? Then you mentioned this increasing communication between data and people at the C-level or whatever. So these things, and then you mentioned these boats. One is yours. What could be other boats? So if people want to use these trends as well, based on what you hear, based on what you see from your boat, what other boats can people build? What's something interesting? What other interesting niches, maybe, or not niches, but challenges to solve?
oh, there's so many, and there's so many interesting companies that I could name. There's the reverse ETL stuff that's going on. There's metrics, sort of the standardization of metrics, or treating metrics like a first-class citizen. There's a couple companies in that space right now. Obviously, like there's the separation of infrastructure orchestration and the logic that's in the pipeline. There's a bunch of interesting stuff going on in the general orchestration and pipeline construction space, Dagster, DBT, Prefect. you name it. There's like warehousing technology, like Snowflake is the obvious example, but like I imagine that there will continue to be progress in terms of performance, elasticity, how easy it is to do things at scale. I'm sure that like because that's sort of deeper in the stack, I feel like the breakthroughs there may come in larger chunks with greater distance between them. I remember I met the founder of Narrator, and it's super interesting paradigm. Like there are people doing some really cool things right now. Some of it is kind of out there and requires totally different paradigm or mindset. Materialize is another one, like differential data flow is super cool. So I think that it's hard for me to comment on this because a lot of these spaces I'm not an expert in. Like I don't know that much about it. So it's hard for me to point out particular areas. But I think that one thing these all have in common is that the founder had some experience with the problem. And I think that you can kind of say, well, I want to start a company. Like, what should I do? And you can start looking around for problems. And that's a legitimate way to go and start a business, and lots of people do. But I think that it's a little bit different from saying, okay, I have experience in this particular problem space. I have a particular perspective on it. I think that there could be a solution here that is different in this way, and then going after that solution. I think then the problem needs to be what you pointed out, overcoming your bias. Like if you may really strongly believe that your new solution or your new angle on the problem is the correct one, but you have to constantly be pushing yourself that you might be wrong, and you need to be trying to disprove that at all times. I think, and if your customers are liking it and they're trying it and they're having good success, then obviously you keep going. But I think that it's hard for me to point to like specific areas that people ought to go into, but rather just to say in general, I would try to focus on what are problems that you've experienced or that you've lived or that you've seen, and thinking deeply about those. Like, what's a better way to do that that would create value for people like you, if those are your customers, or for the people around you, if you're building something more for what used to be your stakeholders before you started the business.
It's already very valuable that you mentioned a bunch of directions like diversity, warehousing, evolution and warehousing, etc. That's also already by itself very valuable, and I guess our listeners will do the homework and dive deeper and explore them and connect and compare them with their own experiences to find this product founder fit, right, that you mentioned. Maybe what I wanted to switch gears to right now is maybe to talk a bit more about your team and how did you guys start it. So we talked about the separation of roles, and in a startup you are usually a generalist. You usually start as a generalist. So I'm curious, what is the right moment for a startup to specialize, to hire dedicated people, and usually the question is when or if to hire salespeople. What do you think about it? What was our easier experience with the commercial part of a startup?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and I'm still apologizing to my team whenever they run into my front end code. There is still some of it there, unfortunately. So I do apologize periodically for that they have to put up with it. Fortunately, like that'll be gone at some point, and then nobody will have to see my shame anymore. But yes, in the beginning as a founder, like I'm doing front end and design, Igor is doing back end. We're both doing sales. And maybe I'm more an account executive, Igor's more sales engineer. Sometimes it's flipped. Who knows? So yeah, in the beginning, everybody's doing everything, and it stays that way, right? I mean, like even the folks that work in sales at Bigeye today, they're doing multiple things. Like they're not sort of in a super narrow scope because we can't afford to be. There's too much to do and too few people, which is the allure of this stage of the company, right? That's the thing that gets a lot of people excited, is that they're curious about, hey, I don't know a whole lot about this. Let me go learn that, or let me try it a few times. It's probably not going to go well the first couple times, and then you'll rapidly improve and get better. I think that there's sort of a Pareto rule here, where you can get 80% good at something with some reasonable amount of work, and then the true mastery of the skill, that last 20%, that requires a ton of additional and continuous investment. And that's what separates someone who's a master at what they do from someone who's just pretty good at it. I think as a founder, especially when it's just the two of you or one of you or three of you or however many it is, you have to do that. somebody has to learn sales. Like, you can't go hire a salesperson for your first sale. Like, it doesn't make any sense. So you are kind of forced to do that. I think the question becomes, how far can you get without mastery? And so for us, what that meant was we started running into customers. Our initial ICP was a little further down market than it is today. And what we ran into was more and more, as we talk to customers, the problems that we address are felt more acutely at slightly larger organizations. So I'm not going after a Fortune 50 company or something like that, but I'm also not talking to a startup, which is who we were talking to in the very early days. So as we moved more and more up market, in particular, when I think about sales, some of the skills that do require longer and more investment to have mastery of become more and more important. I have a tendency to systematize things a lot and to break them down into sort of like rules and components and processes. And in sales, especially, you do need to do that to some degree. There needs to be a structure. There needs to be a pipeline. You need to understand what's going on in the pipeline. It can't be completely bespoke. But a lot of sales is interacting with human beings. And so there's naturally a soft skills element. There's an element of understanding, what do I need to know about the other person? Where are they in their organization? What are their goals? What are they struggling with right now? Not as it relates to your tool, but in a larger area around them. Like, what are they struggling with? What are they dealing with? Who are they trying to make happy? Who do they not care about right now? Those types of things, are not things that I was thinking about naturally early on. I was very much treating the sales cycle like a big piece of clockwork, which, works a little bit, but it doesn't work as you kind of go up market into more and more sophisticated or complex buyers. And so we decided to start working with a gentleman who's now on the team, mostly in an advisory capacity early on. So he was watching our videos and saying, you guys should tweak this, change this. This was really good. Keep doing that, et cetera. So we started out in an advising capacity. Then he started helping us out part-time. And then that evolved into a full-time position. And at that point, like, there was a lot of trust between us because we kind of moved into a full-time role over time. And that was a really good model for us because I slowly went from I'm doing it completely by myself and learning and kind of running into all the obstacles head on to, okay, cool. Now I have a mentor who's advising me and helping me learn faster because he's able to give me pre-distilled information or give me feedback on what I'm doing. And then that merges into, okay, now we're shoulder to shoulder and we're doing it together. And so now I'm learning really high bandwidth, like literally on a call with the customer. And then eventually I feel comfortable to say, okay, cool. Like, I trust this person. Like, they're obviously incredible at what they do. They're doing it much better than I could. They know my business now, and they're able to do this role very, very well. And you can't always go through that type of a process, but I think when you can, that's probably the ideal path.
Mm-hmm.
At least from my perspective.
That's a very interesting and, to me, like, very cool lens to look at it. I've heard some other options, some other lenses to look at hiring salespeople, at the timing to hire a salesperson. For example, someone mentioned to me that when you stop collecting feedback, when you really collected all feedback possible regarding your product, you probably can give sales to someone else. So that's one option to look at sales. And what you say is a bit different, but I guess also very useful, because sometimes you don't stop getting feedback, right?
This was going to be, I'm not sure who said that, and I'm sure that they have a very valid experience, but that was my initial reaction, is like, as primarily a product person, I can't imagine not getting feedback. Like, when I'm not getting feedback, I'm deeply uncomfortable. Like, I always joke, like, the product today is crap. When I look at the product a year ago, that was crap. The product a year from now is going to be crap. Like, it's always going to feel like it's crap because there's so much more to do. It could always be refined. It could be more intelligent. It could be easier to use. It could be more powerful. Like, there's always something that could be better. And so I'm hungry for that feedback from my customers kind of continuously. So the idea of not getting feedback anymore is scary to me.
Let's talk about product then. And I guess one of the very interesting lenses or paradigms to think about feedback is how you can combine customer demands, which can be quite short term, with your longer term vision. Because you know the problem, you experience that, and you have a vision. How to combine this, how to prioritize things. and how to combine both ends of the spectrum?
Yeah, so I do tend to think of it in there's a few, excuse me, there's a spectrum. I guess you could chunk it into buckets. If I were to do that, I would call one bucket the truly bespoke. So a customer wants you to do something that's incredibly unique to their infrastructure or to their use case, and it's really going to require somebody to go in there, script something, glue it together, et cetera, right? That's the sort of relatively obvious stuff that everybody wants to avoid. Or you need to turn that into a services component of the business, and you need to have a model that supports having a services component. If your goal is true platformization or true self-service, then you want to avoid that, obviously. Then there's the category in the middle, which is the stuff that your customers are asking you for, but it has a good chance at generalizing, or it's confirmed that it can be generalized, and you want to try to confirm that as much as you can before you make significant investment in it, right? So I won't say exactly what it is, but there is a fairly large feature that is in beta right now in our product that was something we had sort of talked about. It was on the roadmap. It was for a while from now, but somebody came in and they said, I have exactly this use case. It would need to do something to solve this use case. And we said, okay, cool. Like we have thought about that. That's something that we knew we would get to eventually, but we weren't planning on doing it right now, but pretty sure that this feature that we have on the roadmap would address that problem. So we go and we jam out a very, very, very crude prototype and show it to them, and they're like, yes, this is great. What if it could do these things though? Because like I can't use it the way we literally did it without a front end component at all. There's no interface. And so they said, well, yes, but like it needs to be in the product in the UI, because we have people that want to use it without using a command line interface. So we built a very, very crude, very ugly interface version, and they were just over the moon. They loved it. They said this reduces 80% of the work that we used to do in this workflow. And so now we're like, okay, cool. This has cleared that gate. Now we need to go see who else would use this. Because if it's just this one customer with that use case, we don't really want to make it exposed to everybody. So then you just continue validating, and you go talk to other people, and you don't show them the feature necessarily. You say, do you have this type of problem, or does this pattern exist in your infrastructure? And we started hearing yes to that. So then we start showing them the feature in the crude form, and they start using it. And then now you've got all the signals that you need to go and fully productionize that feature and turn it into something general. Mm-hmm. But that's still a customer requested thing. And it doesn't necessarily advance the larger strategy or product narrative that you have. And so that's sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, things that your customers are unlikely to ever ask for, because it's a change in the way that they think about the problem. So like SLAs is a good example for us. So an SLA for data is not a brand new concept, but what we saw is a lot of people are very focused on like, what is the quality of the data itself? They're focused on like, what is the quality of this column or this table or this, whatever. And we started pushing people to think instead about what is the tolerance and what aspects of your data need to be within certain tolerances for a given use case. Let's measure that instead. And that was a change in customer thinking that they were not, I don't think they were going to bring that to us. Maybe eventually we'd run into a customer who thought that way, but they might not even bother pushing on us to do it, because they're like, well, Bigeye, this is how they do it, and I'm not going to tell them that I actually want to do it this other way. I'll just go do it myself, or I'll find a different vendor or something like that. So we brought this different paradigm to customers, and it landed very well, and we have people that are using that feature heavily now. But that's us making a deliberate space on our roadmap for part of the quarter and saying, okay, we think that this is going to advance our viewpoint on the problem, and it's not something a customer is going to ask for. And it's similar to the middle bucket, where you don't want to invest fully, you don't want to spend a ton of cycles on this thing before you go and validate it, but you can't wait for a customer to ask for it either. You have to put that space on your roadmap periodically and say, this is going to advance my perspective on the problem and my narrative, and you need to carve out space for those customer requests that help you close the deal and get the revenue and grow your customer base. And then you also need to allot time for the sort of moving the strategic roadmap forward. And if you don't do that, and you don't take control of that allocation, your customers will just take over that part of the roadmap, I think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's a very interesting. There was a very interesting part in the one of these buckets, the one that you create a space to build something that propels the vision of your platform, right? The vision of your product, even without a request. And how someone can actually find these spaces, because you can run multiple customer interviews, you talk to them, and you do customer development in a traditional way, and you have these features that you want to build. But how to find and spot something that people don't even talk about? What was your approach, or maybe what could be someone else's approach to that?
Yeah, I think in our case, like this was a perspective that we had again as practitioners, and this is why earlier we were talking about um, as a founder, it is beneficial to you if you can come into the problem as someone who's lived and breathed it because you have a unique perspective on the problem. And so I think it is easier to do these sort of strategic roadmap allocations coming from that viewpoint because you have an opinion. What you need to hear is certain triggers from your customers that they experience problems that could be solved in this new paradigm that you have in mind. And so what you'll hear is keywords, or you'll hear questions, or you'll hear requests for features. The famous faster horse versus the Model T thing. You'll hear faster horses. And you have to kind of be constantly aware, and there are judgment calls, right? There are times where a customer's asked for something. I debriefed with my team afterwards. Somebody said, oh, they're asking for a faster horse here, and I said, I disagree. I think that what they're asking for is fairly straightforward. I think that if we built that, they would be happy. Could we do it a completely different way? Like, we could, but I think this relatively simple thing in the product would address what the customer is asking for without closing off the potential in our strategy. And I think that's the key difference, is if you make an investment in a faster horse that makes a customer happy, this week or next week or something, it's not really a net loss if it doesn't close off part of your strategy. If it starts pointing the ship in the direction away from your strategy, I think that's when it's dangerous. And that's where you have to make a very conscious decision about, is this generating a ton of ARR for me that I can then use to fuel the business's growth? Is it a logo that's of really deep strategic importance? If it is, it may be okay to drag you away from your roadmap slightly in exchange for whatever that reward is. But that needs to be a very analytical decision in my mind. If a customer's request is indeed for a faster horse and you go and deliver that faster horse, you at some point will have to pay that debt and get back onto your strategic roadmap. And so the cost of that needs to be worth whatever you're getting from that customer.
Yeah, I guess it's a very, very, very nice way to connect the vision and very operational things like your future decisions or ARR or whatever with the vision that you have. Really, that's I guess a very nice connection. And just to be cautious of your time, maybe it's the last question. It's actually not the question exactly, more like a suggestion. We talked a lot about a lot of things, but is there any theme or question that we didn't talk about, but you believe deserves to be discussed? Maybe I missed something and you would love to talk about something else. Now is the right time.
Yeah, I think one thing, this is totally off the cuff, but one thing that I think is really important is, as a founder, there's the business strategy, there's how's the fundraising market right now, there's how do you approach customers, like there's a million operational issues that are very concrete and very business focused. And I think there's another aspect, which is like, how are you doing as a human being and as a person who's starting a company, and how is your founder, that your co-founder you're doing it with? And I know that some people do the solo founder route, which I think is incredibly brave. I'm not that type of person. For me, like Igor and I, like, we really anchor each other in the business. And I think an incredibly important part of starting the business for me is my relationship with him. And it is going to be a struggle at times. It's also going to be a huge celebration at times. Like, we close like an amazing customer, they come back to us and they're like, it works, this is awesome, like we want more. And you have those incredible high moments. And then you also have those moments where it's a real struggle. Something goes wrong, and there are a million things that can go wrong. And I think that the dynamics of the founders and your sort of fortitude as an individual in the face of what is an uphill battle, sure, for sure, any startup is an uphill battle, regardless of what it looks like on 10 years later, 20 years later. The beginning is always hard, and I think that dynamic between the two of you, or three of you, or four of you, or whatever it is, or if you're individual, the dynamic between you and your significant other, your mentor, whoever it is, I think that the human element and that sort of fortitude throughout the journey and the ability to celebrate the highs when you did pull it off, and the ability to push through the lows and say, okay, cool, like I'm going to get this back on track. Let's calm down, figure it out, decide what work needs to be done, allocate the time to that work, get rid of the things that we don't need to be doing right now. I think that can be difficult, and I think that the human element really can't be understated. And I think that you need to have a lot of faith in the person that you're getting started with, and you need to have a lot of trust in them, and vice versa. And you need to know, how are the two of you going to interact when things get tough, and can you rely on them to care for you and for you to care for them, and to push through it together. Because I think that that's sometimes more important than like a particular strategy that you've chosen, because that stuff can always be changed.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kyle. Sometimes I feel that when we think and talk about data, we may really lack this human element. And thank you very much for bringing it in. I absolutely agree that it's super important. So thank you very much for talking to us today. And I'm sure we will hear a lot of good news from you, from Igor, and from Bigeye. Thank you.
Great. Very nice to be on the show, Peter. Thank you so much for having me on.